Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction thriller film named Year 10. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with a young man named Jake discovering a packet of biscuits that had expired 10 years ago. Without hesitation, he shoved them into his mouth and began to taste them. His elderly father, sitting nearby, found some broken cigarettes and, just as eagerly, stuffed them into his pocket. As father and son were preparing to leave, a pack of mutated wild dogs came tracing their smell like GPS gadgets and charging toward them. The two immediately took cover in the vehicle, holding their breath as they heard the heavy footsteps fade into the distance. They dared not make a sound, hiding in the ghost-proof vehicle. Since a natural disaster had contaminated all the water sources a decade ago, the world's population had plummeted to less than 1%. With supplies scarce, humanity had fallen from the top of the food chain, and people now had to survive by hunting in the woods. After the wild dogs moved away, the father and son emerged from the abandoned vehicle, grumbling as they opened a door camouflaged with branches. They entered their humble little cabin, which had been their home for many years. The daughter, having been bitten by a beast, had been bedridden for days. The father and son returned empty-handed from their outing, and the family could only drink distilled water to stave off hunger. Jake took out the last of the anti-inflammatory medicine to give to his sister. Her life had been so exhausting in this harsh world that she began to wonder whether surviving the apocalypse was a blessing or a curse. The next morning, Jake went outside to relieve himself when he suddenly heard noises behind him. He turned around to see a group of survivors armed with weapons. Realizing the danger, he quickly ran back to the cabin, but it was clear the group had already discovered their hideout. The old father cursed under his breath and hurriedly gathered the valuables. He led the children out the back door, but the daughter was too injured to move quickly, and in their panic, they even dropped a backpack. Knowing that they were doomed, the father shoved the children into the outhouse and covered them with a wooden board. He then grabbed a wooden stick and charged at the group. Jake and his sister could only watch helplessly from inside the hole, witnessing their father being brutally killed. What made matters worse was that the group didn't leave after robbing the house. They found Jake's abandoned backpack, and the leader flashed his white beard officially before searching the area using his sensitive beard. Slowly, he approached the outhouse, preparing to lift the wooden board. Jake held on tight with all his strength, and after sniffing around like a dog and confirming there was no food or smelly turds, the leader reluctantly left, cursing. Jake and his sister had narrowly escaped, but they could not rejoice. Their home, which they had lived in for years, was completely looted. Even their father's body had been taken. This was the brutal reality of the apocalypse. With so few people left, humanity did not unite but fought over the limited resources, even resorting to killing each other. Jake's sister was in dire need of anti-inflammatory medicine, which had also been stolen by the raiders. Her condition was terminal, and Jake couldn't bear to let her suffer. He hesitated for a long time with a pillow in his hands, unable to bring himself to end her life. He could not accept losing both his father and sister in one day. After briefly repairing the cabin and leaving half a bottle of water for his sister, Jake resolutely left the house. He planned to find some medicine to save her. Walking along the desolate mountain path, Jake shivered his spine and butt in the cold wind. Weak from not having eaten for a long time, he collapsed onto the grass. In his dazed state, he saw a young boy ahead. This was an opportunity he couldn't miss. With his remaining strength, Jake stood up and followed the boy to an abandoned house. He violently kicked open the decrepit door and found an elderly person lying in bed. Jake's heart softened, but instead of taking any of the room's belongings, he simply grabbed a coat to wear. Despite the world's cruelty, he managed to hold on to the moral compass of humanity. After resisting the cold wind, he continued to search the woods, following the trail of footprints. Soon, he found a burned-out campfire and the clean remains of bodies that had been kicked around. Jake realized that the raiders who had stolen the medicine were nearby. He hurried through the trees, and when he spotted smoke rising from the treetops, he thought he had found their hideout. Overcome with excitement, Jake climbed up a tree but accidentally fell, injuring his leg. He could barely run and was quickly surrounded by a pack of wild dogs. In a panic, Jake reignited the nearby fire, and as night fell, the wild dogs hesitated, instinctively avoiding the flames. Once again, Jake escaped, shaken but alive. The next morning, Jake awoke by the burnt-out campfire. Following the direction of the smoke from the previous day, he continued his journey through the mountains and forests. When he reached a small stream, he saw a woman washing bloodstains and her dirty body. It was clear she was one of the raiders. Suppressing his excitement, Jake followed her to a camp where he saw her starting a fire to cook. The men were nowhere to be seen, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity to recover the stolen medicine. Jake, nearly too excited, almost triggered an alarm near the camp's perimeter but carefully circled around it. He quickly slipped into a tent and began searching through drawers. As he rifled through them, he saw someone approaching in the mirror. Reacting instantly, Jake turned around to subdue the woman cooking, attempting to make her cook for him, but she struck with lethal precision. In a desperate move, Jake picked up a rock and struck her down. Not wasting time, he continued searching frantically, but just then, the main group of raiders returned. Jake hurriedly wiped the blood from the floor, dragging the woman's sexy body outside the camp and hiding behind a tree, but not wanting to have a baby with her. From his vantage point, he saw the raiders had captured the little boy he had encountered earlier. The leader was cautious and, through his sensitive beard again, quickly sensed something was wrong upon entering the tent. He tossed some anti-inflammatory pills to an injured comrade before grabbing a wooden stick and starting to search around. Jake shivered in fear, crouching in a tree hollow to avoid detection. However, it wasn't long before the raiders discovered the axe left behind by the woman. Realizing someone had intruded into the camp, they all rushed out to search for the intruder. Jake felt a brief surge of hope and quickly covered the woman's sexy body with leaves, then crawled quietly forward. By now, only one injured man remained in the camp, providing Jake with the perfect opportunity to act. He first approached the bound boy and used a small knife to cut the ropes around his wrists. The boy, in a panic, made some chicken noise that drew the injured raider away, giving Jake the chance to search for the medicine. Soon he found a locked wooden box, and as he was about to pry it open, the raiders returned. Jake had no choice but to hide under the camper van as their footsteps moved back and forth. The bearded leader noticed the lock had been tampered with, and his suspicion grew. Luckily, the raiders' attention was diverted when they discovered the woman's body under the leaves. Jake waited until nightfall, watching as the raiders performed a memorial for the dead woman and then set her body on fire without hormone mercy. The next morning, Jake took advantage of the raiders still being asleep, snoring like pigs, and quietly snuck into the camper. He found the key to the wooden box on the bearded leader's neck. The tension was unbearable, and Jake finally opened the box to find the anti-inflammatory medicine he had been searching for. Fighting back his excitement, he slyly hung the lock on the camper door and fled the camp without looking back. However, he forgot about the alarm at his feet, and the sharp ringing of the bell shattered the stillness. The raiders immediately woke up, kicked open the camper's door, and angrily chased after Jake. Knowing the situation had taken a turn for the worse, Jake ran through the forest, familiar with the terrain. He chose narrow, dangerous paths that the raiders were reluctant to follow, but they shot arrows at him from behind. Jake didn't dare return to his cabin, and instead made his way to an abandoned house he had passed earlier. There, he saw scattered wild dog tracks on the ground, and a sense of foreboding gripped him. Inside, he found the remains of the elderly man, now reduced to bones. Jake felt his spirit crumble, wondering if this was humanity's ultimate fate. In that moment, all his will to fight vanished, and he simply let the raiders close in on him. When Jake next regained consciousness, he found himself bound and at the mercy of the raiders. A campfire was already lit, and several of the raiders were sharpening knives. Just as despair set in, Jake noticed a dog whistle lying on the ground. Without hesitation, he picked it up and blew into it. Even if he had to die, he wasn't about to let these evil men have their way. The wild dogs quickly responded to the whistle, howling in the distance. The raiders panicked, turning and fleeing in all directions like chickens. Jake, desperate to free himself, worked to untie his ropes and crawled to the base of a tree. Miraculously, he evaded the immediate danger. The wild dogs had already targeted the fleeing raiders, and one by one they were picked off, with some even pushing their companions aside in a desperate bid to escape. By the time the bearded leader realized what was happening, only 2 of his men remained. He turned all his fury on Jake, vowing to tear his smelly parts apart. Jake knew he had to fight back. He used his coat as a decoy, ambushing one raider from behind and killing him. Then, disguised as one of the raiders, he entered the woods and killed another. Now the bearded leader was left alone. Jake no longer hid, but shot an arrow that pierced the leader's thigh. Just as Jake was about to finish him off, the bowstring snapped and they were forced into close combat. But before the battle could continue, the wild dogs returned. Jake quickly turned and fled, leaving the bearded leader to meet his fate, torn apart by the dogs with only his sensitive beard spared. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Jake's sister had been awakened by the noise outside. Struggling to stand, she saw a large pack of wild dogs heading her way. She braced herself against the door, but the sound of dogs circling the cabin soon filled the air. It was unclear how much time had passed, but when Jake finally returned, his heart sank as he saw the door to the cabin wide open, thinking that his sister might have not made it until his return. In his despair, Jake dropped to his knees, but just as all hope seemed lost, he heard the faint sound of footsteps behind him. His sister's figure appeared in the doorway. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.